Ever wonder what lurked in the shadows of the greatest leaps in human history? Greetings everyone. Today, we'll uncover the untold stories of the juvenile gangs of Victorian England. A stark contrast to the glittering advancements of the Industrial Revolution. We'll explore how the era's rapid industrialization led to the exploitation and criminalization of children. And how, amidst the soot and the smokestacks, these young souls fought for survival in a world that had turned its back on them. If you find this video interesting, please support us by hitting the like button. Now, let's get started. The rapid industrialization brought about by the Industrial Revolution transformed society, which had previously been centered on agriculture. It may have been a good time for those who became economically successful and wealthy. However, there were sacrifices that were made in the shadow of this rapid development. Working-class children suffered immensely as their family structures were disrupted. Fathers were drawn to urban factories, leaving behind children who had to navigate life without paternal support. They were deprived of the paternal guidance crucial for their growth and development. What I mean is that during the Industrial Revolution, when many factories were built and many factory workers were needed, fathers left their homes and went to work as laborers in the cities where the factories were located. And it is easy to imagine that the absence of fathers made family life less stable. However, the effects of the father's absence did not stop there. There were serious problems that deprived children of a way of life, and even a future. In 19th-century London, children as young as 8 years old were forced to do hard labor in factories and mines. Even children were forced to work the same 12-hour days, and 6 days a week as adults. The working environment was extremely dangerous and accidents often occurred. Children often lost limbs or even their lives. Children were treated as disposable laborers and exploited by society in the factories that were being built one after another. Later, this situation became a problem, and in 1878 the British Parliament enacted the Factories Act, which prohibited the employment of workers under the age of 10. However, by that time, numerous children had already been subjected to grueling labor. Thus, children in those days were forced to live a hard life without a father, and to do hard factory labor. Some of them were forced to wander the streets, and these children eventually became street gangs that roamed the streets and committed acts of theft. Thus, gangs of boys appeared in the Victorian era. How on earth did they live and survive? First of all, boy gangs had a kind of leader who ruled over them. These lads men, as they were called, taught the boys how to steal, and in exchange, they received a profit. In Charles Dickens' novel, Oliver Twist, which describes a gang of boys who were active on the streets of London, there is also a leader named Fagin. While it may seem like a fictional tale, leaders like Fagin were very much a reality, exploiting these boys' gangs. The leader teaches the boys how to steal and takes away what they have stolen. Often, they would even force them to commit more serious crimes, or engage in child prostitution. And some of these vicious leaders made huge profits. A leader by the name of Charles King made the equivalent of $34,000 in today's money in 1 week. What consequences did the boys face when caught by the police? The law at the time was not lenient. Surprisingly, even children as young as 7 years old were tried like adults. In fact, between 1801 and 1836, a whopping 103 children under the age of 14 were sentenced to death. In Victorian London, both boys and girls were sentenced to hard labor. For relatively minor offences, boy gangs were often sent to jail, and forced to do such work as continually pushing wooden wheels as motive power for stone-crushing opportunities. That was not the only punishment meted out. Children as young as 10 years old were sometimes sent to Australia, a British penal colony. In those days, convicts, including children convicted of pickpocketing, were sent to Australia, far away from England, to live there for 7 or 12 years. Or in some cases for the rest of their lives. Today, Australia is a resort destination, with the Great Barrier Reef as its most famous attraction. However, it was an untamed wilderness for the convicts at that time. They were chained and forced to do physical labor there. Sometimes they were forced to do such labor that they had to build the prison, where they would spend the rest of their lives. However, it was impossible for them to build a large building because they had never learned anything before. And the prison was never completed. It is somewhat doubtful that Exile, far from home, and subjected to hard labor for the rest of their lives, was a crime worth committing. In terms of punishment, floggings were also popular in Victorian London. Back then, floggings were not conducted in the privacy of prisons. It was carried out in the town square as if it were a spectacle. Public floggings were orchestrated as spectacles, drawing large crowds and achieving a perverse form of success. One might wonder why they bothered to show off the floggings. But the punishers believed that showing criminals being flogged would deter them from committing crimes. Now, what did they themselves think of the dire situation surrounding these juvenile gangs? In the mid-1800s, a journalist named James Greenwood documented how juveniles viewed their criminal behavior. The answer was a bit surprising. The boys' gangs believed they were right, and that what was wrong was the adults and society that the gangs were targeting. They did not think it was wrong to steal from adults. Greenwood also writes about the boys' thoughts. The boys perceived the adults as hoarders of prosperity, leaving them nothing but scraps. It's a declaration that their actions were a means of survival in the harsh society forged by adults. Stealing is not generally praised, of course. But it makes the children, who are victims of the wealth gap caused by the Industrial Revolution, feel that they have a point. Many boys turn to pickpocketing for the thrill and a sense of accomplishment. For most youth gangs, this act may have been both a survival tactic and a game filled with excitement. For some juvenile gang members, pickpocketing was a matter of survival and their only source of amusement. Perhaps the boy gangs of this era took a kind of pride in their pickpocketing. Thus, in the shadow of the Industrial Revolution, working-class children had a tough life. They either worked all day in factories, begged on the streets, or stole and ended up in prison or penal colonies. Or even if they were lucky enough not to be caught while stealing, they had nowhere to go but filthy flashhouses, hotbeds of crime. Thus, a healthy life was beyond their reach. Living in such a filthy place, there was no way to prevent disease, and many children must have suffered from it. In this period, a disease called smallpox was rampant. Smallpox, which was highly contagious and deadly in the worst-case scenario, was the cause of a pandemic in London in 1870, and was greatly feared by the people of the time. However, a vaccine for smallpox had been developed about 100 years before the epidemic, and in 1871, a law was enacted requiring vaccination. But what use was such a law to children already forsaken by their parents, left to the streets or squalid flash houses? Smallpox is estimated to have killed some 500 million people between 1870 and 1980. Undoubtedly, this number included many juvenile gang members whose survival depended on theft. Children who worked hard, were sent to prison, had no home, and died of smallpox. The conditions surrounding poor children in the Victorian era were truly dire. In 1880, however, there was a glimmer of hope: compulsory education. Compulsory education was introduced for children between the ages of 5 and 12. How did this change the world? At first, many factory owners were not happy about the introduction of compulsory education. They thought it would have a negative impact on factory management. Initially, factory owners feared that compulsory education would hinder their operations. However, this idea was soon dismissed. The children who returned to the factory at age 13, having learned English and math in school, were clearly the best workers. As the children learned to read, write, and take measurements, the factory's profits rather increased. Thus, the introduction of compulsory education for children seems to have had no small positive impact on Victorian England. Of course, education did not immediately get all children off the streets or out of jail. Nonetheless, compulsory education led to a gradual amelioration of the harsh conditions faced by juvenile gangs. The enduring spirit of these children, finding hope in their plight, confirms that hope is never far away. During the Industrial Revolution, boy gangs endured incredibly harsh conditions. The Industrial Revolution is often talked about as a glorious history of mankind. But behind the light there was also a dark, shadowy history. We must learn from these historical lessons and endeavor to ensure our progress shines light on the future, rather than casting it into shadow. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more insightful content. Take care and see you in the next video. Goodbye.